Kiera Eriksen-McAuliffe, and I will be presenting my research on Irish President Éamon de Valera and his tour of the American West in 1919 and 1920 during the Irish War of Independence. So to start with a little background, this is Éamon de Valera. He was a New York-born president of the Irish Parliament, who was also called the Dáil Éireann. During the Irish War of Independence, in 1919, Ireland required greater international recognition and financial support in order to achieve its goals, and so de Valera traveled to the United States in order to both fundraise and to petition the American government to recognize the Republic of Ireland as a state independent of Britain. He undertook one of the largest national tours in United States history, and he visited cities across the country, as you can see in this next slide. I was curious about many parts of Éamon de Valera's tour. His focus across the nation, rather than only on the Irish-dominated Northeast, indicated an interest in regional populations and the belief that people across the country had something to contribute to the Irish cause. So for this project, I focus on the West in particular and ask, what did he believe could be gained there? What did Western Irish populations look like? How did the social and political circumstances in the West look different from those of the East? How did he react to public opinion? And ultimately, I wanted to know how all of these things affected the ways that Westerners perceived de Valera, and also how he responded to these perceptions. So what I ended up finding was that contemporary political issues such as the labor movement and prohibition, which manifested differently in the West from other parts of the country, profoundly affected the ways in which the Western public viewed de Valera and the Irish independence movement as a whole. De Valera reacted to these phenomena and their resulting effects on public opinion in the ways that he spoke about controversial issues such as World War I, but outside of these potentially inflammatory issues, he stayed consistent in his rhetoric from east to west. So first I analyzed the social and political circumstances of the West before and during his tour. The key difference that set the West apart from the East was just how new it was. While the Northeast had old institutions, such as powerful Protestant churches and groups, political bosses, and oppressive elites, the West didn't, which allowed the Irish, along with other white ethnic groups, to enjoy social benefits that they wouldn't have seen in the East. At the same time, the Irish were both directly and tangentially involved in salient social issues, such as the labor movement, prohibition, and post-World War I Americanism and patriotism. This was important because in the same newspapers where one might read about Éamon de Valera's message in favor of Irish independence, one would also see headlines such as these here about rumored invasions of their city by the radical industrial workers of the world, or about Ohio whiskey makers pleased to reopen their business at the end of wartime prohibition. All of the headlines seen here are from the November 15th, 1919 issue of the Spokesman Review out of Spokane, Washington. So inevitably, public opinion was affected by the association created between these issues and the Irish. Historian Hanno Hart wrote, "Media work focuses on the creation of realities, and the press created the realities surrounding Éamon de Valera across the country. Ultimately, there were strong forces both in favor of de Valera and against him. Powerful Irish cities such as San Francisco and Butte, Montana saw strong support for de Valera reflected in their newspapers, while newspapers in other cities took a stance based on a variety of phenomena, such as the political persuasion of the editor, the level of Irish influence both in the area and on the newspaper, and the major readership of the newspaper. Major opposition to de Valera came from a veterans group called the American Legion, who protested his welcome in various cities due to fears about his un-Americanism. So how he reacted was interesting as well. He consistently drew parallels between American and Irish independence from Britain, and as you can see from this quote, he appealed to American values of liberty and of self-determination. But this was his message across the United States, not just in the West. And he remained consistent in his messaging, even when faced with different political circumstances and attitudes. De Valera primarily adjusted the way he spoke about the World War in the West, taking more of a defensive stance there. But he did not adjust the content of his speeches, and he often glossed over the American domestic issues that so strongly affected how he was perceived. His actions in the West, including the attendance of certain events and the use of veterans to accompany him in parades, reflected public opinion more subtly. So to conclude, reactions to de Valera in the East had a great deal to do with issues relating directly to Irish Americans, such as internal conflicts within the movement or latent anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic sentiment. The Western states, however, lacked most of these things, and so they saw opposition to de Valera reflected differently by associations created between him and other salient social issues, including post-war fears of un-Americanism or the labor movement, amongst others. Thank you.